There is a quiet truth that many forget while moving through the noise of daily life. The space you live in is not separate from the mind you carry within. When the home is heavy, the heart becomes restless. When the corners of a dwelling are clear, the thoughts begin to settle like dust finally finding the ground. Tonight, you are invited to see your home not only as walls and objects, but as a living extension of your own energy. Every room holds impressions of words spoken in anger, of worries repeated silently, of joys that passed without gratitude. These impressions do not vanish on their own. They gather layer by layer until the air itself feels dense even when nothing is visibly wrong. To purify a space is not merely to clean what the eye can see. It is to acknowledge what the eye cannot. Begin with awareness. Stand for a moment in stillness at the entrance of your home. Notice how you feel before you step fully inside. This threshold is not just wood or stone, it is a passage between the outer world and your inner world. The state of this entrance often reflects the state of your thoughts. Unclear entrances often mirror distracted minds. As you enter, do so gently, as if you are entering a sacred place, because in truth every home carries sacredness when it is approached with awareness. Observe the corners where dust gathers. Corners are not passive spaces, they are where energy settles when it has nowhere else to go. Just as water becomes stagnant when it does not flow, so too does energy become heavy when it is not refreshed. Tonight, begin with simplicity, clean what is visible. Sweep without hurry, wipe surfaces not as a task but as an offering. With each movement, imagine you are removing not only dust but also the residue of old thoughts. Thoughts of fear, irritation, and confusion often cling to places longer than we realize. Physical cleansing becomes a reflection of inner release. As you move through your space, pay attention to sound. A noisy home often mirrors a restless mind. Reduce unnecessary sound, allow silence to return gradually like a forgotten friend. In that silence, something subtle begins to reawaken. You may notice that your breath slows, your shoulders soften, and your awareness expands. Now turn your attention to air. Open a window if possible, let fresh air move through the rooms. Air is the invisible bridge between inside and outside life. When it is still, the mind feels trapped. When it flows, thoughts become lighter. Even a brief exchange of air can change the emotional atmosphere of a space. Lighting also matters. Soft light, natural or gentle flame-like illumination allows the mind to relax. Harsh brightness often agitates the senses, while softer light invites reflection. In such an environment, clarity begins to arise without effort. As your space becomes physically clearer, begin to notice something more subtle. The emotional weight you may have been carrying starts to loosen. This is not imagination. The mind and environment are deeply interwoven. When one is purified, the other responds. At this stage, bring intention into your home. Not forceful desire, but quiet intention. Stand in the center of your space and acknowledge silently, may this place support peace, may it hold clarity, may it allow natural blessings to move freely. These words are not commands to the universe, they are alignments of your own awareness. You are not asking for something foreign, you are allowing what is already possible to unfold. Often blessings do not arrive, they are simply no longer blocked. Much like water that already exists beneath the ground, it only needs the removal of obstruction to flow. In the same way, your life may not need more force but less resistance. Notice how after cleaning and settling your environment, even small things feel different. A simple act like sitting down becomes more grounded. A breath becomes more noticeable. Thoughts become less tangled. This is the beginning of an awakened home, not a perfect home, but a conscious one. Do not rush to complete everything. Purification is not a single act, but a returning practice. A home remains awakened not because it is once cleansed, but because it is repeatedly remembered. Before you end your practice tonight, sit quietly for a few moments. Feel the space around you. Feel how it holds you without judgment. There is no demand here, only presence. In that presence, something within you also begins to rest. And as you rest, you may realize a simple truth. The blessings you seek are not far away. They do not arrive from distant places. They begin to flow when the inner and outer worlds are no longer in conflict. When your home becomes clear, your perception becomes clear. And when perception becomes clear, even ordinary moments begin to feel quietly abundant. This is the nature of an awakened home. It does not shout its peace. It simply allows it to exist. Home reflects inner mind. The state of your living space mirrors your mental and emotional condition. A cluttered or heavy environment often reflects a restless or distracted mind. The space you live in is never separate from the state of your mind. What surrounds you externally is often a quiet reflection of what is unfolding within you internally. When the mind becomes crowded with unresolved thoughts, worries, and emotional residue, the home slowly begins to echo that same condition. Things remain slightly out of place, even after cleaning. Certain corners feel ignored, not because of neglect alone, but because attention itself has become scattered. In the same way, when the mind is calm and centered, even a simple room begins to feel open, light, and naturally balanced without effort or decoration. This connection is subtle yet constant. Many people try to change their external environment without recognizing that the deeper source of disorder is not in objects but in awareness itself. When awareness is unclear, even simplicity feels chaotic. But when awareness becomes steady, even complexity begins to appear organized. This is why two people can live in the same physical space and experience it completely differently. One may feel burdened while the other feels peaceful. The difference is not in the walls or furniture, but in the inner condition they bring into the space. The home responds quietly to emotional states. Anger leaves a density in the atmosphere, even after words have ended. Worry creates a sense of tightness, as if the air itself has become narrower. Joy, even when brief, leaves a lightness that can linger longer than expected. Over time, these subtle imprints shape the feeling of the environment. They do not remain as visible marks, but as an atmosphere that influences how each new moment is experienced within that space. When the mind is restless, attention does not fully settle anywhere. This scattered attention is reflected in the way spaces are used. Items are placed without awareness, tasks are left half completed, and surroundings begin to feel slightly overwhelming even if nothing is physically excessive. This is not a matter of judgment, but of observation. The outer world is simply mirroring the condition of inner attention. However, the moment awareness returns, even in a small degree, everything begins to shift. A person who moves with presence naturally begins to organize not only their environment but also their thoughts. Actions become more intentional, and even simple movements carry clarity. In such a state, the home begins to align itself without force. Objects find their place and spaces feel more open, not because more effort is applied, but because attention is no longer divided. This is why true order cannot be imposed from outside alone. It arises when the inner state becomes less fragmented. When the mind is no longer constantly moving between past regrets and future anxieties, it naturally settles into the present. And in that present moment, the environment is no longer experienced as something separate to control, but as something to harmonize with. To understand your home is to observe your mind without resistance, not to judge it, but to see its reflection clearly. In doing so, you begin to realize that changing the environment and changing inner awareness are not two separate actions. They are two expressions of the same movement toward clarity. True purification goes beyond cleaning. Physical cleaning is important, but real purification also involves releasing negative emotions, old thoughts, and mental burdens attached to the space. Purification of a space begins in a way that is often quieter than people expect. It is not always a dramatic action or a complete rearrangement of everything within the home. Instead, it is a gradual returning of attention to what has been overlooked, both outside and within. When a person begins to observe their surroundings with more care, they are more likely to notice things that others may have missed. They also begin to notice the subtle emotional weight that certain areas of the home seem to carry. A room is not just a physical container, it becomes a living field shaped by repeated habits, thoughts, and emotional states. When worry is repeatedly experienced in a space, it does not remain confined to the mind alone. Over time, it blends into the atmosphere, making the environment feel slightly tighter, even if nothing has physically changed. Similarly, when calmness is cultivated, even in short moments, it begins to soften the space, as if the air itself becomes more spacious. This is because attention and emotion are constantly interacting with the environment. Nothing is truly separate. The home is not passive, it absorbs the rhythm of those who live within it. Many people attempt to change their external surroundings first, believing that order will automatically bring peace. While organization is helpful, it is incomplete without inner alignment. If the mind remains restless, even the most carefully arranged space will eventually feel unsettled again. This is because the source of imbalance has not been addressed. External order can support inner clarity, but it cannot replace it. Likewise, inner clarity naturally begins to reflect outward as gentle order without force. As awareness deepens, even simple actions such as walking through a room begin to change in quality. There is less mechanical movement and more presence. Objects are noticed rather than ignored. Spaces are experienced rather than merely used. In this state, cleaning is no longer a burden but a form of awareness itself. Each movement becomes an opportunity to release not only physical dust but also mental residue that has accumulated through repetitive thought patterns. Silence plays an important role in this process. A space filled with constant noise rarely allows the mind to settle deeply. When silence is introduced even for short periods, something within begins to reorganize itself naturally. Thoughts become less scattered. Emotions become easier to observe without being overwhelmed by them. In this kind of environment, the mind does not need to be forced into peace, it gradually recognizes it. Air also carries this subtle influence. When air is still and stale, thoughts often feel heavier. When air is fresh and moving, there is a noticeable shift in mental clarity. Opening a window, even briefly, can symbolize the opening of inner perception. It is not the physical act alone that matters, but the reminder that life is always in motion, and nothing remains fixed unless it is held by habit. Light influences this transformation as well. Dim, gentle light encourages reflection and softness in perception, while harsh intensity can sometimes create unnecessary tension in the senses. The way a space is illuminated subtly affects how thoughts are processed within it. This is why certain environments naturally feel more calming than others, not because of decoration alone, but because of the quality of attention they encourage. As purification continues, a deeper realization begins to emerge. The home is not something to control, but something to listen to. It reflects back the condition of its inhabitants with quiet honesty. When inner clutter reduces, external clutter becomes less necessary. When emotional heaviness is released, the space no longer feels burdened by it. In this way, purification is not a one-time event. It is an ongoing awareness that gently aligns inner and outer worlds. Over time, the boundary between the two becomes less rigid. The home begins to feel like an extension of consciousness itself, responding naturally to clarity, softness, and presence. Corners and still air hold energy. Stagnant areas, silence, and unused corners can accumulate emotional and energetic residue, which can affect the overall feeling of the home. When awareness becomes steady within a person, even the way they experience their surroundings begins to change in a quiet but unmistakable manner. The home, once seen as a fixed structure of walls and objects, begins to feel more like a living reflection of inner movement. Nothing in the physical arrangement may change immediately, yet the sense of heaviness or lightness within the space becomes more noticeable. This is because perception itself has shifted. What was once ignored is now observed, and what was once taken for granted is now felt more deeply. In a restless state of mind, a person often moves through their environment without truly seeing it. The eyes function, but attention is elsewhere, scattered among thoughts, memories, and anticipations. In such a condition, even a clean and organized space can feel unsettled. This is not due to the environment itself, but due to the fragmented quality of attention. When attention is divided, everything appears slightly incomplete, as if something is always missing or unfinished. However, when attention becomes unified, even ordinary spaces begin to reveal a different quality. A simple room becomes more than just a place to sit or sleep. It becomes an area of experience where each detail is naturally present without demand. Light falling on a surface, the sound of air moving gently through a window, or the stillness of objects placed on a shelf begins to feel more alive. Nothing has changed externally, yet everything feels more coherent internally. This coherence is not created through effort alone. It arises when resistance within the mind starts to soften. Resistance often shows itself as constant judgment, comparison, or the need to control every aspect of experience. When this resistance is strong, the environment feels tense regardless of its physical condition. But when resistance loosens even slightly, there is a natural relaxation that begins to extend into the surroundings. The home then starts to mirror this inner relaxation. Spaces feel more open, not because more space has been created, but because perception has become less constricted. The corners that once felt heavy begin to feel neutral. Areas that were previously ignored start to feel included within awareness. This inclusion is important because what is fully seen no longer holds unconscious weight. It becomes part of a complete field of awareness rather than a neglected fragment. As this process deepens, the distinction between cleaning and observing begins to blur. Cleaning is no longer just a physical act, and observation is no longer limited to thought. They merge into a single movement of awareness interacting with form. While sweeping a floor or arranging an object, attention remains present, not divided between action and distraction. This presence transforms even simple tasks into moments of quiet alignment. There is also a subtle emotional release that accompanies this shift. Old emotional impressions that were once tied to certain spaces begin to lose their intensity. A place that once reminded a person of stress or confusion no longer carries the same weight. This does not mean memory disappears, but its emotional charge weakens. The space becomes free again, no longer bound to a single past experience. In this way, the home gradually becomes less of a container for accumulated mental residue and more of a living field of present awareness. It stops holding the past tightly and begins to support the unfolding of each new moment more freely. The person living within it also begins to experience themselves differently, not as someone surrounded by disorder, but as someone participating in a continuously refreshing environment. Over time, this relationship becomes less about maintenance and more about harmony. The home no longer demands control, and the mind no longer imposes resistance. Both begin to move together in a quiet rhythm. In that rhythm, clarity is not forced but naturally revealed, and the sense of living becomes lighter, more grounded, and more awake. Environment influences inner state. Light, air, sound, and order in the home directly affect mental clarity, emotional balance, and inner peace. When a person begins to observe their living space with deeper attention, something subtle starts to unfold that is often overlooked in ordinary routines. The home is no longer experienced as a static background to life, but as a responsive field that reflects the condition of awareness itself. What appears outside is continuous and shaped by what is cultivated within. This does not happen in a symbolic or abstract way, but through a very practical and ongoing interaction between perception, emotion, and environment. In moments of mental clarity, even simple surroundings appear more open and coherent. Objects seem to rest in their place without effort, and the space between things feels alive with a quiet sense of order. In contrast, when the mind is burdened with unresolved thoughts, even well-arranged environments can feel slightly uncomfortable or incomplete. This contrast reveals an important truth. The experience of space is not determined solely by its physical structure, but by the quality of attention that perceives it. Attention is often underestimated in its influence. When it is scattered, life feels fragmented. When it is present, life begins to feel unified. A scattered mind does not fully inhabit the space it is in. It moves partially through memory, partially through anticipation, and only briefly through the present. Because of this division, the environment also feels divided. Nothing seems fully settled even when everything appears in order on the surface. As awareness strengthens, this fragmentation begins to lessen. The mind starts to rest more consistently in the present moment. In this state, perception becomes more stable, and the environment is experienced more directly. Instead of being filtered through constant judgment or mental commentary, the space is simply seen as it is. This direct seeing reduces unnecessary emotional interpretation, and what remains is a clearer and more neutral experience of reality. Within a home, this shift in perception gradually influences how spaces are lived in and maintained. Without forcing change, a natural inclination toward order begins to arise. Small actions such as placing objects carefully, clearing unused items, or opening windows for fresh air become expressions of awareness rather than obligations. There is less sense of burden in these actions because they are no longer driven by resistance or avoidance, but by presence. Over time, even areas that were previously ignored begin to receive attention. Corners, surfaces, and hidden spaces are no longer outside awareness. They become included within a wider field of perception. When something is fully seen, it loses its unconscious influence. Neglected spaces often carry a subtle emotional weight, not because of the objects themselves, but because they have been excluded from awareness. Once they are included again, that weight begins to dissolve. The atmosphere of the home also changes in response to this shift. It is not a sudden transformation, but a gradual softening. The environment begins to feel less dense, as if something previously unspoken has been released. Silence becomes more comfortable. Movement within the space becomes more fluid. Even rest feels deeper because the mind is no longer constantly processing unresolved impressions from its surroundings. This process also reveals the inseparability of inner and outer order. One does not truly exist without the influence of the other. Attempting to maintain external order without inner clarity often leads to temporary results. Likewise, seeking inner peace while ignoring one's environment creates unnecessary friction. When both are approached together through awareness rather than force, they begin to support each other naturally. Eventually, the home becomes less of a project to manage and more of a living expression of consciousness in motion. It reflects the ongoing state of attention rather than a fixed condition. In this way, living space and inner life are no longer experienced as separate domains, but as one continuous field that quietly responds to the quality of awareness present within it. Awakened home brings natural flow. When a space is purified with awareness and intention, resistance in life becomes less of a problem. Reduces, allowing peace, clarity, and a natural sense of blessings to flow more freely. When awareness becomes steady and less distracted, a deeper understanding begins to emerge about the nature of support that a living space can offer. A home is not merely a physical shelter, it is an active participant in shaping the inner climate of those who live within it. Every habit practiced inside it, every emotion experienced, and every thought repeated leaves an imprint that gradually defines how the space feels over time. This is why two homes with similar structure and design can feel entirely different. The difference lies not in architecture alone, but in the quality of consciousness that inhabits them. At a surface level, it may appear that maintaining a peaceful environment is only about cleanliness, organization, or decoration. While these aspects are important, they are not sufficient on their own. A space can be visually perfect yet still feel emotionally heavy if the inner state of those who live there remains unsettled. This is because the environment is constantly receiving subtle impressions from human presence. These impressions are not physical objects, but energetic residues formed through repeated emotional and mental patterns. When a person is frequently caught in tension, frustration, or worry, these states do not disappear instantly after the moment has passed. They leave behind a kind of emotional echo within the environment. Over time, these echoes accumulate, making certain areas of the home feel denser or less inviting without any visible reason. Similarly, when moments of gratitude, calm, or genuine presence occur, they also leave impressions, but of a lighter and more harmonious quality. These impressions contribute to a sense of ease within the space. The important realization is that these patterns are not permanent. They are responsive. Just as they are formed through repeated attention and emotion, they can also be transformed through the same means. When awareness is brought consciously into a space, it begins to dissolve what is unnecessary. This does not require force or dramatic change. Even simple acts performed with full attention can gradually shift the atmosphere. Walking slowly through a room with awareness, touching objects with presence, or simply observing without judgment can begin to alter the quality of the environment. As this process unfolds, a person starts to notice that their relationship with their home changes. It is no longer experienced as something separate that must be managed or controlled. Instead, it becomes a partner in the unfolding of daily life. The space begins to feel more responsive, as if it is reflecting back the quality of attention being offered to it. When attention is hurried or distracted, the environment feels unsettled. When attention is calm and continuous, the environment begins to feel more stable and supportive. This shift also influences emotional experience. A space that feels lighter naturally supports a lighter state of mind. Thoughts become less burdened. Emotional reactions lose some of their intensity. There is a subtle sense of ease that arises not from external circumstances changing, but from internal alignment being restored. The home becomes a stabilizing presence, quietly encouraging balance without words or effort. Over time, this understanding deepens into a lived experience. It becomes clear that the boundary between inner and outer life is not as solid as it once seemed. The state of the home and the state of the mind are continuously informing each other. One cannot remain unchanged without influencing the other. This realization brings a quiet responsibility, not as pressure but as awareness. It becomes natural to care for both internal clarity and external space simultaneously, recognizing that they are expressions of the same process. In this way, the home gradually transforms into more than a place of residence. It becomes a field of awareness where life is experienced with greater presence, sensitivity, and clarity. The support it offers is not imposed but revealed through alignment. And in that alignment, both the space and the one who inhabits it begin to feel more awake, more balanced, and more quietly whole.